everyone, welcome to Northeast Tonight, the show that brings diverse opinion into the open and put issues in the region in perspective. I am Wasbir Hussain. More than 70 years after independence, we still talk about underdevelopment in the Northeast, bad roads, poor power supply, lack of livelihood options, poor work culture, and of course, rampant corruption and lack of accountability. Now, why do these facts apply to the Northeast? Why has the region remained the backwaters? Is poor governance the primary reason why the region of 45 million people is lagging behind? Well, if landslides can halt traffic and bring life to a grinding halt in parts of Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim, it could be tragedies like boat disasters and a 11 kV power line snapping and killing 7 people in Assam that can keep these states in the news. If Guwahati, the region's largest city, gets submerged underwater after a single smart shower, what can one expect in the rest of the place? Why do people still complain of corruption in the public distribution system or a disconnect between the elected representatives and the masses after an election gets over? Before we discuss the issue, let's listen to some voices from the region on the issue of governance.
Government can carry the legacy, they can prepare a vision policies for 10 years, 5 years, they can make a policies. And government आना जाना रहता है, कुर्सी बदलते रहते हैं, कुर्सी रहता है, आदमी बदलते रहता हो, तो उसे जो पॉलिसी बनाया जाता है उसको कैरी करना चाहिए. जैसे कि कुछ रोड बनाना हो, उसको 5 साल कंप्लीट होना है, रहते तो कैरी आउट. पर जो आते हैं उसको देखता नहीं है, वो अपना मन मर्जी में जो पॉलिसी बना, मन मर्जी में जो स्कीम बनाता है, ऐसे नहीं होना चाहिए. मैं सरकार से यही उम्मीद करता हूँ, यही दरखास्त करता हूँ, ये रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहूँगा कि अपील करना चाहूँगा कि आपको जो भी बनाना है पॉलिसी बना के चलना है. 5 years 10 years पॉलिसी बनाना है, विजन डॉक्यूमेंटेशन बनाना है. उसी के आधार पर चलने से मुझे उम्मीद है कि कल को अगर गवर्नमेंट बदलो या ना बदलो, चलते रहेंगे. अगर इस सिस्टम होने से अच्छा रहेंगे.
When we look at this area, I don't find much of improvements as far as towards governance is concerned. Today, governance is very important. Every citizen has to also contribute towards governance. Even myself, as a social activist, we have a big role to play here. But at the same time, more importantly, with the government in position, the politicians, the bureaucrats, the technocrats, or the administrators. These people are also to be more honest, and something very important is, it is very important to follow the procedure.
Implementation of schemes, we have so many schemes. The central government is providing lots of schemes in the state of Nagaland. But I don't know, the people are not receiving much of those schemes which the beneficiaries should receive are not being received, I should say. The people, like when it comes to other agri sector, these things are very important. The villagers, they should have received all those schemes sanctioned by the central government. The farmers, they are also not getting their due share. I think this has been misused or misplaced somewhere in the government sector or in the department sector.
Okay, the refrain is the same. We have heard the gentleman from Arunachal Pradesh and the 2 gentlemen from Nagaland. The refrain is the same. They talk of corruption, they talk of poor governance. There are schemes, but whether the people are getting to avail those schemes, these are questions which we are going to discuss. Now, to discuss whether the region suffers from a serious governance deficit, I am joined from Shillong by Mr. R.G. Lingdo, former Meghalaya Home Minister and a well-known thinker. Also in Shillong, I have Dr. Prasenjit Biswas, professor at the Northeastern Hill University, and at our studios in Guwahati, I have Mr. Mayur Bora, writer and commentator, Professor Akhil Ranjan Datta from Guwahati University, Dr. Rakhi Kalita Maral from Cotton University, and Dr. Sriparna Barua from the Indian Institute for Entrepreneurship and a leading development expert. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Northeast Tonight. I'd like to go straight to you, Mr. R.J. Lyngdoh in Shillong. Mr. Lyngdoh, you have been on both sides of the spectrum. You had been a political leader, and now, of course, you are out of active politics. You were watching the scenario from the sidelines. Mr. Lyngdoh, 7 decades of independence, and yet one is still talking about the Northeast being underdeveloped. We are talking about poor amenities, poor infrastructure, poor roads, lack of power supply, as I've said in the beginning. What are your thoughts, Mr. R.J. Lyngdoh?
I would say it's the system of governance that we follow. Somehow or the other, even after 72 years of independence,
right,
we still seem to be suffering from a massive colonial hangover till this time. The people who govern still govern in a very exploitative manner. The people who are governed still do not see themselves as part of the whole system. They feel that the people who govern are not part of themselves. They don't take any ownership of the government, and as a result, accountability, transparency is what suffers.
Absolutely. Accountability, transparency suffers. These are very, very key governance issues. Accountable. I mean, we elect a government for 5 years, then we just can't do anything about them. Whether they work, they don't work, we have to wait for 5 years to give our verdict at the end of the day. So these are issues that needs to be discussed. Prosenjit Biswas, you have heard Mr. R.J. Lyngdoh talking about accountability, talking about governance issues.
Right.
Now, why 72 years after independence, why are we still talking about lack of development in the Northeast? There is no fund crunch. If you look at the fund flow, whether it is the state funds or the central funds for various schemes coming in, there is just no dearth of funds. Then why are we seeing no development in the Northeast? Why do people have to live without power, bad roads, poor drinking water facilities, no livelihood options, no higher education facilities? What is going on?
Yeah, I mean, your worries are very, very justified, because there is a complete absence of grassroots level institutional network, and funds do not reach at the grassroots level institutions. So I can identify a patron-client relationship between the central government and the people of the region, because there is this patron-client relationship, so people are effectively disabled in developing their own capabilities, their own creativity. Central government or the state government doesn't support the ingenuity and the capacity building processes which are at work at the grassroots level. Let me give you an example. I have seen a small community building up a small hydropower station in a remote village in Assam, in southern Assam, in the Assam-Manipur border.
Right.
The electricity generation process is completely funded by the villagers themselves. They have appealed to the central government and the state government to give them fund so that they can sustain the infrastructure, but central and the state government, in the name of a scheme, will never be funded. So the schemes are worked out in a manner that the benefit doesn't reach to the people. People are not empowered by these kind of schemes. Faulty schemes, patron-client relationship, a complete absence of a sense of quality of work and quality of life. Because what is delivered by the central government to the state government never reaches at the doorstep. Quality of healthcare, quality of education, quality of construction
we will take
is
this forward.
qualitatively very, very low. And
Dr.
that is one
Prosenjit
major
Biswas,
problem.
we will take this forward.
Right.
I will start from my left. Although I am neither a leftist nor a rightist, of course, Akhil Ranjan Datta is accused of being a leftist thinker. I'll come to that. I'll give him a response to, opportunity to answer. Mayur Bora, I mean, patron-client relationship. One of the reasons why, this disparity, why the region is not moving forward, why the problem occurs. That is what Dr. Prosenjit Biswas thinks.
I think Biswas has given a wonderful nomenclature to what we have seen in the last 20-30 years. When the relationship is bound to be patron-client, definitely the man who is supposed to be the patron, they will always develop or they will always exhibit patronizing attitude towards the people like us. And in a democracy, actually, we are not subjects, we are not in some sort of monarchy. The main problem is, Wasbir, there are two problems. One is rise of corruption, with which rise of consumerism and many other things are linked. Secondly, many things, there are a lot of problems with the Indian governance system, Indian constitution, we agree. But even after that, Indian governance, you can say the system, what he was hinting at, that it's a federal system, but with a strong unitary bias.
Right.
But even then, we say we have got a lot of scope for improving our governance model. But the problem is, now everything is being sacrificed at the altar of primordial politics in the last 3-4 years. And because of that, instead of improving the governance model in different states, we have seen most of the politicians cutting across, irrespective of their party affiliation, ethnicity and religion. They are busy in garnering, all the time they are oriented towards thinking about the election, and with election comes the rhetoric, and governance is always in retreat. So retreating governance is the main challenge for the Indian people.
Retreating governance, the main challenge for the Indian people. Dr. Rakhi Kalita, you know, do you agree the very, very interesting nomenclature given by Prasenjit Biswa's patron-client relationship, patronizing attitude, the government decides what is the development scheme, there is no bottoms-up approach, hardly, it's in name only. Who decides what is development? Why are we still talking about lack of development in the northeastern region when there is not really a fund crunch?
Yeah, rightfully so, Wasbir. The client-patron relationship, the nomenclature given by Prasenjit, seems to really strike at the root of the problem. We do not have participatory governance in the country, let alone our state. People's sense of belonging and the knowledge of assets and resources that we need to protect and govern and own as our rightful heritage is really not seeping down to the bottom. It is never a bottom-up kind of system in which we have institutions, civil society, government, bureaucrats, academics, all participating with shared knowledge. This is what is very starkly missing in the present day governance.
Absolutely, absolutely. On the screen which you just seen is the view of Guwahati city with a smart. These are the condition of the roads in Nagaland and other places in the northeast, as you can see on the screen. So these are potholes right in the middle of that is the 11 kV wire that snapped in Nagaon and leading to the death of thing. These are some scenes of corruption, people being so this is the state of affairs. This is really a sad state of affairs that we are seeing. I'm not generalizing. There are people doing really good work. That is the Assam Public Service Commission scam, people being arrested, people being accused of fraudulently passing their examinations and so on and so forth. My question to you, Dr. Sriparna Barua, is this. 45 million people, that comprises only 3.5% of total India's population in the northeastern region. Out of 1.2 billion population, we are 45 million. That is 3.5% of the population. The Northeast contributes only 2.5% of the national GDP, out of which only 1.5% of this 2.5 comes from Assam alone. That means the northeastern, other states in the northeast except Assam is not contributing anything at all to the GDP. Now, what's going on? I mean, how long can we wait hoping for big industrial houses to come and open shop? How long can we depend on the government and complain about lack of livelihood options? Has the government failed? Is it an issue of governance and lack of accountability?
Absolutely, Wasbir, you've touched on the right points. You know, it is basically the absolute lack of governance. If you look at the economic development, the parameter that you're talking about,
right,
and you look at the Public Affairs Committee, which has come up with a report card on governance, you look at economic indicators, particularly industrialization, you will see that Northeast, most of the states, they rank beyond 15 out of the 30 states.
True.
So you look at, you know, the 5 most promising states. Northeast is nowhere. In fact, I was just looking at some of the states and the different parameters. Economic development, they don't compare anywhere. So immediately the answer comes that, you know, there has been no development. Secondly, the amount of funds which have been pumped in the name of economic development, amount of events which are being recognized every time we are having, in terms of sectors. When we talk about economic development, we've been talking the same story again and again. There is potential for tourism, there's potential for agri.
We are only talking about
potential. Yeah. But where exactly, when you talk about bamboo, where are the bamboo?
Why are some of the potential not been able to be converted into happening things on the ground?
I think we, as a civil society, we now need to be conscious about how much money has come on the different sectors. I was just analyzing. For example, we talk about textiles. You look at, these are now public documents. Look at the amount of money which has come in the name of clusters in textiles. And can we name one particular cluster which is doing well? I mean, crores and
now we'll expand on that, Sriparna. Basically, there are potential which you have not been able to convert.
Correct.
Dr. Akhiranjan Datta, what is the broad picture that you have got out of this conversation in the last 10 to 15 minutes? What is the sense that you have got?
I think two things are very important. We need to understand the very character of the Indian state, as Prasenjit has pointed out, patron-client relationship. That is the very character of the Indian state. But that patron-client relationship is not single-layered, one-layered. It is multi-layered. If this patron-client relationship is there between the union government and the state government, and it goes down and down and down. So this multi-layered patron-client relationship is one of the very important factors behind the backwardness we have been talking about. The second one is the political class that is emerging in the region is also equally responsible. The political class which has come up has got trapped into this patron-client relationship, and given a chance, I'll explain it.
But more importantly, you're saying the political class is trapped in this patron-client relationship, but isn't it the political class itself who is responsible for the patronizing attitude?
That's I'm telling. You look at kind of negotiations that we have with the Indian government, or kind of smaller ethnic communities who are having kind of negotiations with the state government. Now, in the process, rather than the kind of development or people's development, I'll call it people's development, what becomes the priorities? Priorities becomes the capturing political power. Now, in the process of capturing political power, all other things are thrown into,
at the end of the day,
but I'll add one other point. What happened if priorities as a whole in the whole of Northeast India? I'll just mention a few things. Look at Assam's politics, language bill, language politics in 1960s, Assam movement and Assam Accord, Bodo Accord. You look at what were the important issues which figured, and what were the consequences or subsequences apart from capturing power. Have these acts
achieved? Now, that is a very, very interesting point which Akhil has made. At the end of the day, the objective of the political class is just to capture power. Prasenjit Biswas, how do you like to add? Do you agree to this view that at the end of the day, it is just capturing political power that is the primary agenda?
Yes, capturing political power depends on a certain kind of sectarianism and parochialism, and that has completely corrupted the moral spectrum of politics in the Northeast India. And the other important thing is that the idea of quality, the idea of self-respect, dignity, and even recognizing people's competitiveness and their capabilities is totally absent. As we say that there is no priority of people's rights over the idea of projected notion of good. Government projects a certain notion of good, and political parties articulate this in their manifesto, but at the end of the day, the rights of the people are never actualized, nor recognized, which is the constitutional or legal responsibility of the governing classes, but they do not perform that responsibility as per the kind of charter based which they come to power.
True.
So you can see a clear gap between the machinations of acquiring power and then implementing the power through certain well-defined means and ends. You can always see a conflict between means and ends there. If I take a Gandhian kind of a line, I would say we are far away from Swaraj, the idea of Swaraj that Gandhi gave. We are far away from a total revolution, the idea that Jayaprakash Narayan gave.
Right.
And back home in Assam, every indigenous community, every community has its own conception of good. That conception of good doesn't find any place in any political manifesto.
Absolutely. Now,
therefore, there is an estrangement of political class from the people.
True. True.
Now, one last sentence. Because of this, we can see a certain kind of judicial hyperactivism. It is as if judiciary is trying to rule over the political representational system. And this is increasingly happening in case of entire Northeast.
Absolutely, somebody has to, if there is a vacuum, somebody has to fill the vacuum and get the work done. That is, of course, perhaps a natural thing to expect. Now, Mr. R.G. Lyngdoh, do you think, there is a talk of the political class, Mr. Lyngdoh, do you think our political class, who are the lawmakers, are dependent on the bureaucracy and therefore cannot take proper initiatives? At the end of the day, it is the bureaucracy which actually rules. Are you agreeing? Do you agree to this perception, or do you have an alternate view, Mr. Lyngdoh?
No, I think more than the politicians depending on the bureaucrats, I think it's the other way around. I feel that the executive or the bureaucracy needs to be at par with the legislative. Then a system of check and balance happens. But at the moment, what we find is that the legislative totally dominates over the executive, and they use transfers and postings as a weapon to keep the bureaucrats in check.
Absolutely.
And I think this is where the big gap also lies, a politician will only want to distribute fish, because a good politician is one who has made himself indispensable to the people. That's how we measure a good politician. Now he will always want to distribute fish, but distributing fish is not development. The bureaucracy has to teach the people how to make fishing rods, where to go and fish, and how to catch fish.
Yeah, that is generally, making people live on doles are not going to help. What you are essentially saying, Mr. R.G. Lyngdoh, is that the political class as well as the bureaucrats should make people self-sufficient and enable them to stand on their own feet. Are you saying, Mr. Lyngdoh, there is a huge trust deficit? I have to go for a break. But before that, Mr. Lyngdoh, are you saying there is a huge trust deficit between the politicians and the bureaucrats? And is this affecting progress in the region?
That's true. That's true, because what we find is that the legislative and the executive do not work in tandem with each other, and we find a lot of instances where perhaps even the executive hide behind this huge black screen that is in front of them.
Right.
They don't come into the forefront, and they allow the politicians to be in the forefront of everything. They remain in the background.
Right.
And a lot of them just take advantage of that situation. The politicians are left holding the blame for everything, while the bureaucrats remain in the background.
Okay, the politicians are held responsible for everything. Bureaucrat is in the backdrop. On that note, to go for a short break. Stay on, don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mr. R.G. Lyngdoh, we have been talking about politicians and bureaucrats. But my question is, what about the masses? What about the ordinary people? Don't you think they also have a responsibility? Seeking transparency and accountability. Where are the people asking for all this? Mr. Lyngdoh.
Now, you see, I think the people will have to take ownership of the government. They will have to understand that they are responsible for the government that they get, and they have to demand for the checks and balances that are required. They have to demand for transparency. They have to demand for accountability. But the problem is the people themselves feel dependent upon the government. They feel that they cannot stand on their own feet. They feel that it's only the government who can help them. And that is why they fall short of demanding transparency and accountability from the government. in case whatever little help they're getting also dries up. See, that's the main problem.
That's the main problem. Mayur Bora, you have heard little while ago Dr. Prasenjit Biswas talking about, the different separation of powers.
Yeah, before Wasbir, I'd like to say one thing. Just why I said governance in retreat perpetually in Northeast. Just 10 years back, try to remember, let us try to collectively jog our memory. Everyone, a noise has been created. I deliberately used the word noise about 2020 Northeast. An impression has been given to all the people in Northeast 10 years back that in 2020 or by 2020, this will be, everything will be hunky-dory in Northeast. And now we are just 2 years away. What you have seen, more or less all the problem, infrastructural insufficiencies, all those things continue. Secondly, coming to the point of Mr. Prasenjit Biswas, I don't know what's his view, but I feel he was mildly annoyed with the fact that separation of power between executive and judiciary, the dividing line is getting blurred. Let me tell him, I know separation of power is one of the important and very cardinal principles on which Indian Democratic Republic is premised.
Let Prasenjit respond. Let Prasenjit respond.
When there is inadequacy from the executive side to do their assigned duties, then somebody has to step in and do it. That's why, see the NRC exercise. Had Supreme Court not been there, the indigenous people of Assam and Northeastern people would have been in great jeopardy today. I don't say today they are in an extremely good position, but only because of Supreme Court's intervention we have got something to talk about.
Let Prasenjit respond. Yes, Prasenjit. Prasenjit, can you hear me? I think Prasenjit, we have lost the line to Prasenjit. Now, Rakhi Kalita, basically what we are talking about, I was asking this question to Mr. R.G. Lingdo. Where does the people fit in this scheme of things? You see, there is no, perhaps we are the only, I'm going to ask this question to Mr. Lingdo as well, because he had been the Home Minister, he had first-hand experience of administering a state. My question to you, Dr. Rakhi Kalita, is this, that Northeast is perhaps one of the unique regions in the entire country where every single ethnic group has a student organization. Every ethnic group has a student organization. But unfortunately, every student group raises only political demands. Nobody is talking about raising issues on governance, nobody is raising seriously issues on development, nobody is seriously raising issues on livelihood options or industrial houses coming and opening shop. So, I mean, don't you think that these pressure groups can channelize their energy and make the government move?
I agree, Wasbir, and which is why I started off by talking about civil society and these mass-based groups and movements, which can intervene in a way that people cannot imagine. For example, in very recent times, post the Nepal earthquake, just as a small example from across the border in a small nation state, Nepalis have said that by taking ownership of the post disaster reconstruction, they have been able to not only minimize costs, huge government exchequer that goes into reconstruction and rehabilitation, they have even made better roads, and they have allowed villages to come up and re-emerge in a manner that was not possible earlier. There was so much of skepticism about the government. Likewise, in Assam, while there is a proliferation of groups and peasant movements and indigenous peoples groups, you're right, questions have always harbored around politics and harbored around one representation rather than resource ownership,
so at the end of the day,
asset recognition.
At the end of the day, everything veers towards electoral politics, and student organizations perhaps are a stepping stone or a springboard to mainstream politics. Prasenjit, do you agree to this view? There is no dearth of student groups in the Northeast. Every single community has a student organization. But if their energy is channelized into putting pressure on the government or highlighting issues of development and governance, don't you think things would have been a lot better? Okay, we need to fix that audio with, I think there was no audio at all with Prasenjit Biswas. Sriparna, I mean, we have seen two big disasters in Assam. One was the boat disaster. Why did it happen? Later on we realized that nobody was inspecting the boat. The engine sort of crashed, and therefore the boat was swept away and hit a pillar and it capsized and people died. Now, nobody was manning that 11 kV volt electric power transmission line. It snapped and 7 people got killed. Now, I mean, aren't these issues the totally callous attitude of the people responsible? Now, government of employees' salary is increasing by the day. They're getting 7 pay commission. Now, why can't these people work as expected?
I think the entire work culture needs a radical change. There is anyone getting a job, particularly a government job, is just a comfort zone that they create for themselves, and after that they think, what else can we do? It's not about, there is no work ethics at all. So that is one of the major problems. And any decision, and more than that, any decision that they take, a government or bureaucrat or anyone who takes it, it's more driven by other factors rather than the need of the project. You know, you look at how does development take place. Development takes place when there is a need-based approach being taken for creating an infrastructure. You look at each and every infrastructure which has been created here for development. Which is the infrastructure which you say is not a white elephant today?
Absolutely.
So we have talked about, you know, bamboo park, we've talked about textile park, we've talked about food park.
But at the end of the day, these are talks, these remain projects.
And many consultants have made money.
Okay, I'd like to come back to my original question of why students groups are not really diverting their entire energy on development, livelihood and governance issues, and why are they only talking about political issues? Yes, politics is an integral part of life and society, we know that, but why are students organizations in the Northeast only and only focusing their attention on political issues?
See, you know, there are many issues involved into that, but one of the very important issues is the kind of ideological bankruptcy which is marked by, which we see in case of the whole lot of students organizations here. The main aim has been to stake claim over the state. In other words, they want to bargain with the state, but they are not very sure why are they bargaining with the state. The bargaining with the state is driven by the power. They want power. They want to be part of the whole power system. But that doesn't have any reflection on the requirements of the people. So, now they mobilize the people. Therefore, I was telling about the political class. They are also part of the political class now.
Yes.
So they want to mobilize the people through primordial loyalties. I think that has become one of the very dangerous things in Northeast India. They want to mobilize by focusing on language, by focusing on culture, by focusing on ethnicity.
It's a very interesting
point. Devoid of road, devoid of many other things.
Now,
the substantive malnutrition, for example, has never figured in any of the agendas of the students' movement. So this is, and it is very good for the state, and the state finds it, you know, extremely comfortable because they can bargain on these issues. But when the issues of substantive development comes in, like malnutrition, like inequality, like ownership over resources, I think this is very important thing.
Prasenjit Biswas, Akhil Ranjan Datta, Prasenjit, can you hear me? First of all,
I can hear you.
Yeah. Now, you know, Akhil Ranjan Datta is saying that student organizations in the Northeast today have become a part of the political class. My question is, I was earlier trying to ask you this question. Northeast is a unique region in the sense that every ethnic group has a student organization. If their energy is channelized in the right direction, perhaps things could have been a lot better. Do you agree, first of all, that student groups are a part of the political class today?
They are actually acting as instruments of the political class. They never raise issues which will be very much pro-people and centered on people's well-being. For example, no one talks about declining agriculture. Everyone jumps at building bigger corporate houses or bringing industrial capital in the region, while the basic infrastructure of agriculture is completely neglected. You can think about the total metrics about income generation and reduction of inequality between various segments of people. No student organizations bother about such hard economic issues. Instead, they raise softer economic and political issues based on ethno-nationalism, and they are trapped into that petrol-client relationship that if they raise issues, they will act as bargaining chips for some funding, etc. This will completely divert the course of political action from the mainstream of development to the side stream of ethno-national mobilization, which Akhil has very rightly pointed out. a lack of self-understanding. People do not understand where exactly is the lack. They don't understand how to really channelize their energy towards which direction. And political class take full advantage of this confusion, and they put up certain agenda which do not lead to any positive development in the ultimate analysis. Therefore, you can see politics becomes a tool of manipulation in which student parties, other political players, and ordinary people, they fall prey to it.
Now, okay, Prasenjit, Moyur, you respond. Basically, you know what Prasenjit is basically saying, that student groups have become an extension of the political class. He said that political parties or politicians manipulate, or politics is a game of manipulation where student groups as well as common people fall prey. So, political parties,
I by and large agree with him, but I don't want to paint the all organization with the same brush. Let me tell you why they do it. We have to understand fundamentally what is the reason for doing that. Some of the organization, be it student organization or other organization, they want to capture the fancy of the people. Since they want to capture the fancy of the people, they will not talk about agriculture, they will not talk about malnutrition, as my friend is telling. They will try to talk about all those issues which will try to create some anxiety and fear about their existence, and somebody from other religion, other caste, other ethnicity coming and overwhelming them with their presence. And because of that, some organization, you have seen, see the history of Assam. 30 years, 40 years, you have seen some people who are earlier in the part of the education, now they are sitting in power in Dispur. So it is nothing wrong. I don't say in a democracy, everyone has got that liberty to do it. But my point is, if you want to really do for, and Mr. R.G. Lingdo, what he has been telling is okay, but I don't know, had it been a full-time politician, he would have said the same thing. Some of the things what he has said is totally utopian. He said people do not do, people get a chance only once in 5 years. We do not have the system of recall in Indian governance.
We'll have to ask R.G. Lingdo this question. Okay, Moyur, yes, Akhil Ranjan.
The other point, which is very important, we need to point out, because we are negotiating with the state. You know, when we talk development, there are many layers. People can also take the initiatives for development, but in a situation like Northeast India, for the development, we are primarily depending on the state, road, agriculture, so on and so forth. But through the proliferation of students' movement, what is happening in a big way is the fragmentation of people's resistance, or fragmentation of people's bargaining. For example, if you want to talk about,
homogeneity is not there.
Homogeneity is there in terms of problems. Flood is a universal problem.
But homogeneity is there in terms of the problem, but no
not
homogeneous
in terms of
approach.
Bargaining.
No homogeneous approach in dealing with these problems. That's what Akhil Ranjan Datta is saying. It's a very important point. Now, Dr. Siparna Barua, you see, we have been hearing about this lookist, and now we've been hearing about the actist policy. Whether it was started with the Congress, then the subsequent regimes, and now, of course, the present government is also talking about, has renamed it as the actist policy. Now, basically, what are the governance issues? We are talking about connectivity, we are talking about road, railways, and air connectivity. But what are we, suppose the road is built, the railways are in place, how are we going to utilize it? This is my simple question to you. Will there be so much of human traffic on these roads for tourism alone? What do you think? Are you excited about the actist policy?
I'm not excited about the actist policy, frankly, because, you know, what is it that we are going to send?
Yeah, that is my question.
What are we manufacturing? That's, again, I'm going back to the point which I said, you know, all the investments which has come into different sectors. Why are we talking again and again about the same old things that we talked about 5 years back? Why are we always talking about food processing as a sector having a lot of potential? Why are we talking about agri sector having a lot of potential?
We are talking about tourism as having a lot of potential.
But where in the ground level, how much of production do we have?
No, has anyone done a proper market survey as of today? Has anyone gone to Myanmar? Has anyone gone to Thailand? Has anyone gone to Bangladesh to assess as to what is the market there for our handloom and handicraft products, for example?
The other point which I would like to say here is, you know, when we are talking about assessing the market, you know, where exactly is the market? I mean, who are the producers? And the most important thing is, we have so many reports. You just browse on the net in terms of reports being generated by different agencies. You know, we always have a thought process in Northeast that all answers has to come from some outside agency. So in the name of doing research, in the name of doing reports, we have thousands of reports, everyone will
many
be
copying pasting has
copying
also been
pasting
done.
has been happening.
There's
And
no
we are
connection with the
there's no
reality.
connection.
There's no connection with
Yeah,
the
no,
reality.
I'd
and
like
then
to say,
Yes, Rakhi, go on.
and then
I was
yeah,
no,
yeah, sure,
yeah,
sure.
I was just about to say this, and I'm snatching the word from him, from Okhil, is that there is this huge divide. We have this appearance and reality. You see what is happening with the government and what is happening with a lot of the agencies that that push governance, you know, whether they are governmental, whether they are private, whether they're public, is to brand the region as you know, being a kind of, you know, a paradise with so many resources and so many other things, while at the grassroots there is no resource recognition. Assets are not known. What are our assets? Do the people know what our assets are that we need to protect, first of all, before we go on to the political rhetoric? Two, the other important thing that we have often missed out is that there is a lot of cosmetic change that is happening around the region, whether we are looking at urban areas or we are looking across, you know, cities and across states in the region. There is a lot of cosmetic change, but deep down it doesn't percolate.
Cosmetic changes alone, Prasenjit
And half an hour rain is enough to drain out their cosmetic change.
Absolutely, that's what I was talking about. Half an hour of smart shower in Guwahati is enough to drown that cosmetic change.
And to kill people.
And to kill people, of course,
And then
kill
when we
people.
talk about, you know, connecting with
Rest of India.
or the, you know,
Or
Southeast Asia, you know, what about the logistics sector? Why are we talking about manufacturing sector? Fine, but what about the logistics sector?
What about the logistics sector? Now, coming to you, Prasenjit Biswas, coming to you, what about the opposition? You know, the opposition parties today has become only symbolic. Except from criticizing the ruling party, they have no positive agenda. What is the alternative suggestion that the opposition usually provides to the ruling government in terms of a crisis? Don't you think they are also public representatives and have a moral obligation to come up with the right advice at the right time, instead of only performing the role of criticizing the government for the sake of criticism most of the occasions?
No, the opposition parties have their own political manifestos, and you can see they are pressing forth this manifesto. And I call it declining agriculture, and declining agriculture has been a major subject of Congress Party or AIAPF or NDP or even BPF.
Right.
But these people on ground are not facing for it. Who is the representative? Who is the agricultural class that needs to be organized? And how they should be strengthened? And what are the inputs that should be given in? And how investments have to be carried out in the agricultural sector.
Right.
Which is the basic sector for food security, for income generation, for employment generation. So we are not really
Prasenjit, hold on. We will try to. Prasenjit, hold on. I'm coming back to you. Okhil Ranjan Datta, the same question goes to you. The role of the opposition, it has been completely, it looks like as if they have completely diluted.
See, if you look at, I'll go back a little, you know, past. If you look at Assam Legislative Assembly, for example, just after independence, you know, there were opposition parties like Socialist Party and Communist Party of India.
Yeah.
They had different ideological orientation, they had different political orientation, and they had a different agenda of development. Therefore, they could very strongly pursue their own conviction and could come out with strong evidences.
Come up with their own blueprint as well.
Yes, own blueprint. Look at Gauri-Shankar Bhattacharya, for example, the way he was working on the failure of the government and challenging the government at every moment. Now, what is the opposition and what is the ruling party? Do you have any difference? They are in the opposition today, they may be in the government tomorrow, and they do not have any alternative agenda in terms of development. They agree on that appropriation of resources is the only agenda.
The question is the opposition is getting diluted. They don't have an alternative agenda, and they are almost towing the line or criticizing government for the sake of it. We'll go for a short break now. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this very short break. You know, Prasenjit Biswas, you know, we are talking about, your audio was slightly unclear.
Yeah, sure.
The opposition has absolutely no alternative agenda. They are almost hobnobbing with whoever is ruling wherever. So, so it's a free for all.
Not exactly. The nature of the neoliberal developmental agenda is that it creates fragmentation, it divides between one social sector and another. What we can see is a constant reduction of public expenditure. And in terms of delivery to the people, it lacks and it very much falters. Therefore, the neoliberal developmental agenda does not really allow an oppositional political party to assert developmental rights, which effectively mean asserting people's rights, right to employment, right to resources, right to land, right to forest, right to access to various kinds of resources. All these rights are not only less articulated, and they are never implemented on the ground, because neoliberal capital does not allow any kind of people-centric development. So, that the opposition parties do not have an alternative, for that the larger structural situation of the neoliberal developmental agenda has to be questioned, which has come through this kind of globalizing project such as Act East policy, where people talk about investment from outside and they don't talk about building up the indigenous
Moyur, you wanted to say something on
resources by empowering the people themselves.
Carry on. I agree with Mr. Biswas that coming out of the restrictive confines of his academic justification through neoliberalism, let me tell you something on the what we have seen in Assam. Suppose Assam today, Congress is the main party, opposition party. But somebody asked me that day, what is the Congress or who is the Congress? Then I asked him alternatively, who is the Congress today? There is one Congress within Rajiv Bhavan. There is another Congress outside the Rajiv Bhavan. They are fighting, throwing punches there. So I think they are concerned. He was telling, you are only telling that they are hobnobbing with who's and who, or maybe with the ruling party. I think they are all the time.
In simple terms,
in simple terms, vested interest all the time. They are hobnobbing with vested interest all the time. That's why genuine aspiration, genuine protest of the people, they tend to be relegated to the background.
Plain and simple terms, without going into a complicated academic analysis that you are giving. I
did not give any academic analysis.
Complicated, academic, ambiguous, academic and complicated analysis. My question is, that is my view.
Let me put it in a very simple way.
I have to ask this question to Moyur.
No, let me be
give me 15 seconds. Yes, carry on.
The neoliberal development model that Prasenjit has referred to is very, we need to understand it. It doesn't provide a space for ideological assertion or political assertion. Whether it is Congress or whether it is BJP, it agrees to the overall macro development paradigm. In terms of reduction of subsidies or reduction of fund to different social sectors and so on and so forth. But more importantly, it facilitates a process of appropriation of resources. We need to understand that not that development is not happening in terms of large revamps that government has been talking about, bringing in huge investment, but it will not bring any development, genuine development for the commons at the ground.
We will argue that. We'll argue that. But in order to simplify Moyur Bora's finely crafted prose, what I have understood is that he's basically talking about the opposition being fragmented.
You are asking me, see, opposition has abdicated its main responsibility. They are hobnobbing with their own vested interest.
There is no way out.
See, today, don't you feel, instead of fighting among themselves, the main opposition party in the state of Assam, they can genuinely raise the concern of the people? Have you seen that happening? I don't know why you are supporting the Congress party now so vociferously, but my
Who is supporting the Congress party? Who is supporting?
No, I'm not asking.
That's a wrong statement.
My understanding.
That's a wrong statement.
Okay, let me be entitled to my opinion. My thing is, what I have seen, in a democracy, I have got highest respect for the opposition party. What I have seen Congress in last 3-4 months, they are not to be concerned about the real issues of the citizens.
Rakhi wants to make a point. Rakhi Kalita, yes. Then I'll come to you, Dr. Siparna Barua. Rakhi, yes.
Briefly, one point, and that I think we've been missing throughout the discussion is that we've made the people a monolith. We've homogenized all the people without figuring out that in the urban, realms, we have an urban elite which had certain vested interests, which may be hand in glove with, the nexus of the legislative executive. You have a roughly say an urban middle class, which is very disorganized.
So Rakhi, what you were essentially saying is that urban debate is not the last word.
No, it's not the last word. Also, we are forgetting totally that the major stakeholders were the urban poor, who actually are very concerned about what is happening. unlike, you know, the urban middle class, which is completely sometimes disinterested. Absolutely. We've seen we are not a monolith. You know, you may be sitting in your drawing room and discussing development. After it is just a, you know, after dinner table talk. And after that, it is all over. We are not really going down to the system, to the bottom of the line, where the urban poor reside. The urban poor are the major stakeholders.
Let me not necessarily. No, people are also working with, for example, the street dwellers and street vendors. For example, I have been working with them. You know, the kind of agony that they do have. And at the grounds, they are also putting resistance. But I'll agree with your point to the extent that we have not been in a way successful in terms of building a bridge between the aspirations and our discourses. I think that's a fault line.
And we have not been able to distribute equitably our resources, which is one of the major flaws of our governance.
Absolutely. The civil society is not at all conscious. You know, look at the middle class. They're just not concerned in many ways. And that unless
my point.
That's unless and until civil society gets takes up some responsibility, we just cannot be relying only on the politicians.
No. Sriparna, I'm asking this question to everyone actually. First, Sriparna, as a development professional, Sriparna, won't you want political parties to basically indulge more in development politics than just the politics of winning elections?
Definitely yes, but since that is not happening, that is the most ideal situation, but that is not happening. And it's, just reminding me of something which Jawaharlal Nehru said way back in 48 when he said, try us with destiny. We are talking about the same things even today after 70 years. So, there is a responsibility of the civil society now.
Now, when we're talking about development politics, Mr. R.G. Lindo, Northeast is, as I have been talking and asking this question to several of our panelists, so many student groups, nobody talks about nobody indulges in the politics of development. I wish our student groups talk less on political issues, but I have no problem if they talk politics of development. Why can't we see that happening in the northeastern region? Any number of student groups exist in the northeast, Mr. R.G. Lindo.
See, I think even these different organizations are there as a livelihood option rather than to do anything concrete. I'm sorry to say this. I find that most so-called students who form part of these pressure groups are there because they see it as a chance to make a livelihood for themselves. Otherwise they don't see a future for themselves. It's a very bleak situation that we find ourselves in today. And I feel that, at this point of time, you find that even among the politicians itself, people who are in the opposition say that, oh, we are not in power. Now, this is a statement that defeats itself, To say that your power comes from being in the treasury benches, I think is very, very wrong, because your power comes from the people. And when you're in the opposition, you say we're not in power. When you're in the treasury benches, you forget and you let that power come to your head, go to your head, and you start exploiting.
Yes, he's talking a lot of sense there, Mr. R.G. Lindo. But Prosenjit Biswas, yes.
Times,
where
people are taught
Mr. Lindo, finish.
Dependent on the government, don't.
Right, Dr. Prosenjit Biswas, Mr. R.G. Lindo is saying he thinks that I am sure he's not generalizing, but he's saying that student politics today is a livelihood option.
Yeah. I think that is in one way true, but in a narrow sense. It really doesn't create livelihood possibilities. It rather creates an environment of opinions by which political ideas can be moved and corridors of power could be shaken. So to build up livelihood options, one has to do grassroots level work, and one has to be supported by the state. A state which has abandoned and abdicated welfareist measures will not be supporting a grassroots level initiative for income and employment generation. Therefore, unless there is a shift to a pro-people policy orientation, there will be always a gap between what governance aims to achieve and what is achieved at the ground level. therefore, what is needed is proper policy directive which has to be worked out to the people, and the ideas must emerge from the popular discourse and the people's discussion, and which government must respond to, which government is not doing. Think about the big dam construction. In a state like Arunachal Pradesh, 178 mega dams are being constructed. Think about Lower Subansiri Dam and the desertification of the whole area.
Rakhi wants to make a point. Rakhi Kalita wants
I want to, in addition to what you say and the various nuances of student movements groups, I would also like to add that one of the less vested groups, which we are completely ignoring here, are grassroots women's groups, whether in the North Bank or down here. You know, we have seen and elsewhere in Meghalaya, in Arunachal Pradesh. Please, let's not miss this very important stakeholder.
I think let us just
less vested.
That's why I say let's not paint it with the
I'd
like just point out one thing. Not that the students' organizations are not talking about the politics of development. They have been talking about politics of development.
We are not generalizing.
Yeah, we are not generalizing. But the most important thing, and they are talking more in terms of rhetoric rather than in substance, because when they take, we need ownership of resources, they are not really analyzing what are the hindrances towards having ownership over resources. For example, they have not talked about what are the revenue laws, revenue regulation, what are the land laws, what are the forest laws. Those issues have not figured substantially. There are some organizations, for example, Krishak Mukti Sangram Samiti, that they are doing in a way in terms of bringing a substantive debate. I think apart from Krishak Mukti Sangram Samiti, no other organizations have been doing it in a very substantive manner.
True. Correct. Now, Sriparna, you have been working a lot. It's a point Rakhi made. We cannot ignore the grassroots level women's organization. You are one who have been working very, very closely for many years now with grassroots level women's organizations. What has been your experience?
The experience is that, you know, these women have just come up to a certain level, but then I wouldn't say that they are empowered to really make an impact so far. Because from a point when there was no livelihood for them, they've come to a stage where they started earning a little bit empowered. So their position in the family has a little bit gone up. But there's a way to go on that. So we cannot really take that as a way to go.
Now, Mayur, you see, when we're talking about this, Sriparna, the point make, you have come up to a certain level, but way to go. There's hardly any financial independence, not really. But if we see the broad picture in the northeastern region, women are not allowed, they're debarred by customary laws to join active politics.
Take the example of Meghalaya. Meghalaya is a matrilineal society. Despite being a matrilineal society, you have seen there the women are not allowed to participate in a democratic election or anywhere. So
it is very strong.
And now the
Khasi
Hills Autonomous District Council is also coming up with a law preventing Khasi women from marrying non-Khasis. Saying that
one sentence that Barua has said, that we should also celebrate the self-help rhetoric of the new liberal agenda. When we talk about women's empowerment, at many times it is reduced to self-help women groups, which is a very dangerous thing. It also implies
it has to go beyond that.
It also implies abdication of the responsibility on the part of the
government. We are talking about decision-making power.
Self-help group as a concept, we have to agree that an egg today is better than a hen tomorrow. So definitely,
but how long we have to think big.
But if you
have to think big. This is not.
This has to go. Only thing we have to make it faster. The evolution of egg to the hen. I think that has to be faster.
What I am suggesting is that self-help should also lead towards the ownership of resources. That's very important.
And the
if that is being abdicated, self-help.
I think we are not blaming the common people.
Let me add a new dimension. What about decision-making powers with the women? So that is just not existing, even in a matrilineal society like Meghalaya, in Nagaland.
Let me give you a practical example. Suppose self-help group, now you are not very excited about the idea, but just before the elections,
who said? Don't put words in my mouth.
Let me tell you, Wasbir, let me tell you, just before the election, from any party, BJP, AGP or Congress, everyone will go and they will try to say, because there is a sizable chunk of people in the villages, to catch power, they say, we'll give 5,000, we'll give 10,000. That giving out doles to them also disrupts the whole mechanism, whole journey towards overall development with which the whole thing was conceptualized, designed and thought to be implemented.
Let us ask Prosenjit Biswas what triggered the laughter. Is it the noise or is it some of the arguments or points being put forward? Prosenjit Biswas.
There is a testimony to the fact that your audio has become clear now.
Clear now.
So kudos to Northeast Live.
Arguments are absolutely necessary, and one should really make a clear standpoint. If we are not able to understand the gender gap that is existing and that is widening, we can see at the bottom level a lot of women's participation at the wage work level. But beyond the bottom level participation, women are almost not there at the middle rung of the productive activity.
Right.
So, the level of production, women's role is traditionally secured, but at the same time, they are not having enough avenues and enough resources to really come up to a certain level of development which will empower them fully.
But
so therefore, you can see that within the structure of development,
but Prosenjit,
women
my
are somehow
question to you,
marginalized.
Prosenjit, my question to you, are the women, yes, taking your point, but are the women not been able to seize the opportunities, or do you think there are obstacles deliberately put in the quest to, achieve some of this?
Yes.
And let me add, they are used. They
think about women from the linguistic and religious minorities.
Used to push an agenda.
Women from the religious and linguistic minorities cannot come up at the same level as the women from the mainstream. You can see this kind of cultural differences that really push them down a little bit.
I agree.
So how do we address the question of cultural, linguistic, religious difference in bringing women to a certain level playing ground? There is an absence of fairness. There is discrepancy and discrimination towards women in the entire employment arena.
Absolutely.
The other important point, I think that the state remains to be very, very patriarchal. Even if we celebrate that women are very empowered at the grassroots, but in Northeast India, when you look at Nagaland, for example, when the question of reservation, 74th Amendment of the Constitution regarding the local government at the urban level, that came up, that was resisted like anything.
I would want Moyur to make his stand clear on this patriarchal and matriarchal debate, whether he is gender neutral. I mean, what is your stand on this?
So my stand is, I always say what Virginia Woolf said, that history of man's opposition to women emancipation movement is more interesting than women emancipation movement itself. That's why let me say throughout history, anonymous, thy name is women. So we have to reverse that, and I think so like this, ably conducted by Wasbir Hussain, can be a guiding line for that. I'll be very happy to join in that. That's my view.
So Sriparna.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and we have to remember again and again, when we're talking about women, since the last discussion has come more to women. We talk about Northeast as women being absolutely empowered, but look at Manipur, where we have the Ima Bazaar all women market, but look at a woman goes at 5 o'clock and reaches home late, and she is doubly exploited. And this is one angle. Just because she's earning doesn't mean that she's empowered. This is a stand we all need to look at it.
I think the ownership, the very question of ownership has to be expanded as far as the women are concerned. It's not only owning a market and selling products, but it has to go down owning the resources, owning political space, owning economic space, which is not happening.
Again, that brings me to the core focus of this debate that we started about issue of governance. Now, Prosenjit, do you think the government policies are to be, to a great extent, lopsided, flawed, deliberate? What do you think? Because why do you think 72 years or 70 years after independence, we are still talking about women's emancipation, where we have been talking about these issues even today? I mean, on one side, we said that we are a nuclear power and so on and so forth. We are talking about so many things, but at the same time, we are talking about the basics, that is gender equality. So why is this? Is it also an issue of governance?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, you have given the right metaphor. Look at the situation in Northeast. There is an enormous amount of militarization, and there is this security architecture under which development is taking place. Now, if that is how development is geared up, who will give place to women in that? Various segments of poor women and other poor people have no place in decision making. Poverty alleviation program ends up into some cosmetic changes. Look at the way afforestation is carried out. Increasing forest will increase the livelihood, possibilities of livelihood. But people are denied access to forest resources. Forest resources controlled by a mafia. Similarly, land resource, water resource are controlled by a mafia. So there is a big nexus that is operating in the plane of development, which is keeping out, erasing women, marginalized and downtrodden segments of people. So there should be a basic course correction in the action of policy planning and development. Planning has been completely given up, public expenditure has been totally reduced, inflation is going up, income is falling, wage is falling. Given this kind of a dismal economic picture in which we are living, women's empowerment seems to be a distant dream and an agenda. This agenda will keep coming in every election, but it will never get fulfilled. Unless it is connected to the concrete economic realities of the experiences of life and the productive potential, it cannot be really improved.
Right, hold on, Prasenjit, there are a lot of responses to what you said. Yes, Mayur.
If you allow me to put place on the main idea that you tried to propound today, the governance deficit, which is very clear from everyone's words that it has been widening. And for that, what is to be done? Nothing, I think the brightness is, or the bright sun is not there for us, but we must try to, as Rakhi Kolita sometime back was telling about rehabilitating and reconstruction by giving the example of Nepal. But I will say we have to rehabilitate some common sense in the minds of all politicians so that restoration of commitment to democratic norms can be there. Then only some changes.
I'll differ on the point because and I spoke about it. All political party has a consensus on neoliberal development. Now, what is the neoliberal development is all about? It's a nexus between the corporate and state. And what the corporate and state is doing absolutely against the interest of the commons. And when it goes against the interest of the commons, it becomes completely militarized. Therefore, you cannot just advise the political parties that you talk of substantive issues of the common masses. They are not going to do it. Even if they do it, they will do it rhetorically. In terms of policy formulation, when they come to power, they are not going to implement it. Therefore, I think this resistance and mobilization is very, very important. And we have to transcend these primordial royalties, either in terms of gender or in terms of ethnicity, language.
The politics of primordiality, initially also I said, I agree with you what you have said, and nowhere ever we said that we should remain silent about what these people are trying to do. Through different methods, like be it agitation, be it like talk shows and civil society initiative at both the ladies have also boldly initiated. I think that needs to be brought into the mainstream.
But civil society should be a romantic idea. I think I'm very clear. But civil society has to be very, very political in terms of
but I'm asking this question to everyone. Little while ago, I think Okhil, you said that student organizations are a part of the political class. What about the civil society? Somebody will say that civil society is also becoming a part of the political class.
No.
Extension of the political class.
Nobody is painting.
Nobody is painting in the same brush. Let me be clear.
Absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Students' organizations are the core components of civil society in Northeast India. And we are very critical about...
we are not generalizing. We are not generalizing.
We are not generalizing. But they are core components of the civil society. But there are other organizations. For example, look at the women organizations, for example, marginal workers, for example, marginal the people working at the grassroots, for example, street dwellers, for example, street vendors, for example. Those are also important components of the civil society. Now, these civil society are, or the forces are constantly challenging the kind of development model which is imposed upon. I think that civil society space has to be given, more space and attention.
Siparna, I want to make a point. Siparna.
I think the major point which is required is, there has to be a public accountability, and there has to be a civil society which brings out a report card. This is an environment in which we are having so much of investments.
So that brings me to, we had a debate earlier whether there should be a accountability commission. Accountability commission, people will say, oh, it will be a body without any teeth, much like the Assam Human Rights Commission and so on and so forth, or the Women's Commission. But yes, even if it has no teeth, if it is a body comprising of credible people, it can definitely act as a deterrent. We'll go into that, but before that, very quickly, Mr. R.G. Lingdo, we're talking about civil society's role, but people in the Northeast, generally do not question the government. Is it impacting on development? The general trend is that there is no concerted attempt at questioning the government. Hardly. Do you think it is impacting on development? R.G. Lingdo.
See, that's exactly it. The people are scared to demand for what their rights are. You know, they fall short because they feel that, you know, the government is someone who is all powerful. They feel that the government is something that is alien to them, and they allow the government to exploit them. Now, this is perhaps the result of even the education system, which does not allow us to question, that does not encourage us to ask questions, that does not encourage us to demand for transparencies. And the whole system, while it talks about the rights of the people, it does not talk about the responsibilities of the people. I think this is something that the education system has to also start addressing. Education is perhaps the slowest form of bringing about change. But besides education, there's no other surer form of bringing about the change. We have to build up the capacity of our youth to grow out of this present situation where we allow politicians to dominate. I think the youth have to be taught to come out of it.
Absolutely. I'm running short of time. Prosenjit Biswas, what are your concluding remarks? What are your last words, Prosenjit?
Right. I would say ethno-nationalism and the ethnocentric mobilization in civil society context actually serves as a major trap for not being able to raise proper developmental issues. Whenever people demand development, that is sidetracked by a certain kind of ethno-nationalist mobilization. And this has been common in the entire Northeast. The other thing is this security paradigm within which state is operating. State doesn't allow people's expression to gel into a kind of
that has to change the
Prosenjit, I'm running up paradigm. State tries to suppress developmental aspiration.
We hope that changes, Prosenjit. Last words, Akhilanjan Datta.
So you started with that I am accused of being a left. I am indeed a left, and therefore I'll speak in the left language. The neoliberal development agenda is facilitating neoliberal authoritarianism and neoliberal feudalism, which believes in silent and loud authoritarianism and not allowing people to question both the military regime and also development paradigm. I think unless and until we question it, kind of governance that we are talking about and we are aspiring for is not going to happen.
Thank you for being transparent about your left ideology, Siparna Barua.
I think it is the consciousness which is most important, the casual attitude about, not being able to, not ever questioning the government. That is something we have to come out of it, and we all need to be conscious citizens, particularly the students.
Need to be conscious citizens and question the government. Rakhi Kalita?
I will make two important points, and that is we really need to rework our value and establish our values back in society at the cost of sounding very, very idealized. I will say that there has to be a value establishment because we are losing track of what our responsibilities are, what our assets are. And finally, I'll further the other point that was made earlier, and I would say that we really need to now look more and more participatory. Governance has to be participatory.
Governing has to be participatory. Last word to you, Mayur.
Taking a cue from Mr. Biswas about that last two important observation he has made, but there is no solution. So as a robustly optimistic liberal democrat, let me tell that we must try to cut down on real politics and rhetoric and bring about some amount of sense and sensibility to the governance narrative. Then only the discussion we had for last 1.5 hours will fructify or will be meaningful for the people who are watching.
Absolutely. Thank you for explaining in such a simple terminologies, Mayur Bara. On that note, I thank all my panelists for being engaged in this very, very interesting discussion. On this note, I end this edition of Northeast Tonight. Good night and goodbye.